Oh,
And Thomas?
ich höre die Glocken.
That's hearing Lower Saxon.
Osterglocken, die Botschaft höre ich wohl, allein mir fehlt der Glaube.
Wow, ganz toll. Hi Nancy, hi Jenny.
Hello.
Hi.
Hello.
Hello, hi.
Hi Evelina, Sylvia, Amanda, Frida, Francis. Hi everyone.
Hi, everybody.
Hello.
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 Where are you from? Is there anyone who would like to talk about where they are from? Excuse me?
Jemand
Ja,
sagt,
maybe-
der Ton ist gerade abgebrochen.
Can you
Really?
hear us? Maybe just put in the chat where you're from. If you can just put in the chat where you are at the moment, that would be great.
Baku, Aserbaidschan, Vietnam, Piedmont, Vilnius, Dubrovnik, Hague, Azerbaijan, Germany, Cyprus, Frankfurt, Turkey, Armenia, Germany, Saarbrücken, Dubrovnik, Reutlingen, Indien, Sweden, Finland, Berlin, Dresden, Vilnius, Germany, Greece, Gloucester, Czechia, Germany, Barcelona, Ireland, Ukraine. Wow,
That means we're very international, aren't we?
Very
yeah.
international.
Iran, Washington, D.C., England, Argentina, Germany, Athens, Greece, India, very international.
Wow. I'm amazed.
Pakistan, France, excellent.
I mean, we've had more than 380 registrations for this webinar, but experience tells us that it's never the case that everyone comes. Anyone who is not there would miss a great event. So it's
Well, I
not
think
our
we
fault
passed
if we
100,
don't
which
have.
I think is a good mark.
That's a
Excuse
good
me?
number.
Good number. Okay, yeah.
101.
That's true.
Excellent.
Going up.
Wow, it's 103 even. That's quite something. So we are at more than 25% already.
Great.
That's wonderful. Mm-hmm. So the question now is when we should officially start so that we would get too much delayed.
Well, I would say 2 minutes so that we have 5 minutes.
Come in and
okay, yeah. So it's 18:03 now.
Yeah, so we can say 05. So then.
Okay. 5 sounds good.
Thomas wants to hit 150. I can tell.
Well, it's 110 already, so it's really the adrenaline of the speaker is going up when you see the numbers. 111.
Absolutely.
12. And then we have only 1 minute 20 left, so that's 12.
We might be able to make it 2 minutes 20, whatever.
No. I think we should not exaggerate,
I see, okay.
Ordnung muss sein.
Ordnung muss sein, that is wahr. And we are multilingual, so we are celebrating multilingualism. That's why we have to speak several languages.
Exactly, and multicultural.
Bonjour.
Bonjour à tous. Ok, 1 minute.
1 minute, très bien. C'est ce qu'on va faire.
115.
Hallo nach Bayern.
Oh, Catalonia, fantastic. Georgia, Ireland, Albania, Istanbul.
India, wow, wonderful. Very happy to have you with us.
Armenia again, Algeria. Wow, that's impressive.
Deutschland, herzlich willkommen.
That's impressive. Florence, Bahrain. Yeah, from Germany, but I'm Italian.
Buonasera, Italia.
Okay, Boston, US. Okay, so I think
we can
start now. Yes, let's start.
Shall we officially start? So then,
yes,
I will start, and then Ian, you may want to present to introduce Thomas Buck, now, and our problem is it's from Thomas to Thomas T, who is me and Thomas Buck, but I will start officially now. So good evening, everyone, and thanks so much for joining us today. My name is Thomas T, so Thomas Tinnefeld. I'm a professor of applied languages at Saarland University of Applied Sciences in Germany, and president of the Language Council of Saarland, and also we are also here on behalf of the ICC, a board member of the ICC. I'm delighted to be hosting today's event together with Ian McMaster, along with our special guest, Professor Thomas Buck from the University of Edinburgh. I would like to thank Thomas for accepting my invitation to speak to us today. So thank you very much, Thomas. Because Thomas gave a fascinating talk at the Saarbrücken Conference on Forward Language Teaching, which I organized in 2021. That's when we first met. We first met online, we haven't met in person, and here you are again today, online, but nonetheless, that's wonderful. Thomas will be talking about why our brains and our world need languages to cross borders. That's a really interesting topic, especially when you think about how important languages are for connecting communities and cultures, as well as keeping our brains healthy and helping us think clearly. So this event is happening at a special time in the calendar, because since 2001, the European Day of Languages has been celebrated every year on the 26th of September, which means actually tomorrow, at the Council of Europe's initiative, together with the European Commission, and it was also promoted by the European Centre for Modern Languages. So this day makes us think about how many different languages Europe has. 24 official languages, as well as a lot of regional and minority languages. It shows that multilingualism is more than just a pretty face. It's an important part of democracy and diversity. And this year's motto of the European Day of Languages is Languages open hearts and minds. Les langues ouvrent les cœurs et nos esprits. Cette devise du Conseil de l'Europe illustre la vision française du multilinguisme. Elle rappelle que comprendre une langue, c'est comprendre une âme collective, une manière de voir le monde. C'est un appel à la tolérance, à l'ouverture et à la richesse de la diversité linguistique européenne. Este lema refleja la visión del multilingüismo como un puente transformador entre culturas. Esta frase evoca la profunda conexión entre lengua, identidad y comprensión mutua. Representa un llamamiento a la empatía, al diálogo intercultural y al reconocimiento de que cada idioma es un tesoro que nos une. Un tesoro que nos une. Sprachen öffnen Herz und Geist. Dieses Motto unterstreicht, dass Sprachen weit mehr sind als Kommunikationsmittel. Sie sind Fenster zu unterschiedlichen Denkweisen, Emotionen und Weltanschauungen. Jede Sprache trägt die Seele einer Kultur in sich und ermöglicht es uns, über unsere eigenen Grenzen hinauszublicken und die Welt durch andere und auch durch anderer Menschen Augen zu sehen. And right afterwards, on December the 27th, which is the day after tomorrow, the European Parliament celebrates Multilingualism Day. This is a chance to look back and also to look ahead to Europe's commitment to languages and the values they represent. All these festive days show how important it is to have more than one language, both in education and as a way of connecting with our shared European identity. That's why today's webinar is being run together by the ICC and the Language Council of Saarland. We want to celebrate these occasions by bringing together researchers, educators, and practitioners to exchange opinions and get inspired, which is exactly what Thomas's work stands for. And now I'll let Ian take it from here. He'll be introducing today's speaker. Ian, please go ahead.
Yes, delighted to do that. My name's Ian McMaster. I'm based in Munich and spent my professional life working in business communication. And we have an extremely international audience today, as we've seen, people from basically all around the world. We've also got a very large audience, and I'm sure that's one of the reasons is because of our guest, Thomas himself, and also the fact that we're talking about the relationship between the brain and language. And I think for most of us, in different aspects of that, and for most of us, that's a extremely interesting topic, those influences. Thomas was himself very international background, born and raised in Poland, studied medicine in Germany and Switzerland, and worked in psychiatry, neurology, and neurosurgery in Switzerland, Germany, England, and Scotland, where he is now a professor at the University of Edinburgh, personal chair of cognitive science of language and multilingualism. And his range of topics is extremely broad in terms of age groups, areas of the world, and also these different dimensions of the influence, the impact recently of language learning and multilingualism on cognitive functions. So I say I'm sure that the word brain in the title has brought many, many people into this talk. And without any further to do, I'm going to turn over to Thomas and let him get going, because he's getting nervous. The longer he listens to us, the more nervous he's getting. Over to you, Thomas.
Excited.
Okay, thank you very much. So can you hear me and can you see the slide? Can you see us moving to the, one moment, to the next slide? Yes, can you see the next slide?
Yes, we can.
Okay, fantastic. So let me start with a certain tension that I want to build up, so to say, as opening of this talk. And that is that we have at the same time, at the moment, two different narratives when it comes to languages and multilingualism, and particularly language learning. So there is the narrative of the positive aspects of it, sociocultural cultural insights, as we heard already, opening minds, opening the eyes to other cultures, other points of view, and metalinguistic insight, understanding one's own language better, cognition beyond language across the lifespan, including disease, stroke and dementia. I will tell about that a little bit more. And that is something which 8 years ago Dina Mehmetbegovic and myself put together the idea of healthy linguistic diet, that in fact linguistic diversity around us and in us is part of healthy living, like a diet which includes a lot of different ingredients. But at the same time, we have a very, very different, not to say opposite narrative. Languages being difficult or hard to learn, superfluous, particularly now in the age of artificial intelligence, and it shows itself in decrease in language learning and in fact in death of more and more languages, so to say loss of linguistic diversity. And just to show that I'm not speaking about something far away in time or remote, this is an article which I found today, which has been only published yesterday, so 24th of September 2025 in Spectator, which says why kids won't learn languages. And in this paragraph, you can basically see both narratives. I feel the answer why children are abandoning languages is worryingly simple. Learning a language is hard. So here we have difficult and hard. It requires significant time, consistent practice, problem solving, confidence, commitment, self-discipline, and of course sharp memory. And then comes narrative number one. There is no doubt that the rigorous cognitive load involved is good for the brain. It builds curiosity, teaches humility, so here we have, so to say, the kind of cultural insights, slows down mental decline, I will be speaking about it later, makes you better at multitasking and decision making, and improves your understanding of your native tongue, so metalinguistic knowledge, by drawing your focus to the mechanics of language. So we have both narratives, but then the second wins, yet sadly, I am not sure today's pupils or schools are up for the challenge. Languages have a reputation for being risky and difficult. Now, there are some practical things about schools that there is a general impression that language exams are more difficult than of other subjects, which of course is not particularly motivating for children. So if they want to have good results, to go to good universities and so on, they take, so to say, away languages from the list because it would be difficult to get a good mark. But apart from that, this idea that it's hard, difficult, and maybe superfluous is quite popular. So to kind of come back to show it, as I mentioned 8 years ago, Dina and I have developed this healthy diet metaphor. We met at a meeting of European Commission, the Committee for Multilingualism in Brussels, and we discovered that we both worked with this metaphor of the healthy diet, except in different times of life, so to say. Dina working in education, particularly in the context of healthy school meals and so on, me in context of healthy aging, dementia and so on. And what we kind of in that time described was that we have here two different models of or metaphors for the brain. One are the limited resources models, where the brain is seen like a chest of drawers, strict static localization and competition for space. So basically it's a little bit like, if you don't have, so to say, space enough in a chest of drawers for t-shirts, you cannot put there, your shirts or other things. So in a way, the idea is that basically everything in brain is localized and takes space. Now, the kind of alternative model that we suggested was what we called added value models, an interactive model where the sum is more than just the sum of ingredients. Dynamic localization, neuroplasticity, emphasis on learning and adaptation. And that is something which we basically wrote down in two papers in the year 2017 in Language Society and Policy and European Journal of Language Policy. We'll come to these both journals later on. And it is not terribly new what we said. I would say this is something which was in the tradition of European education for millennia rather than centuries. For a long time, good education meant learning also Latin, maybe even Greek and Hebrew. You have what I kind of always like, the example of Alfonso el Sabio, a king of Spain, who was writing his legal and epic works in Spanish, but his lyric in Portuguese or Galaico-Portuguese, which was considered to be kind of more lyrical language. And in 19th, early 20th century, in the time where, for instance, I work on the history of neurology, basically all scientists in Europe were supposed to be able to read at least in French, German and English, so that they cite each other's work, even although they might not have had an active knowledge of these languages. But it's not only just European. So here, by the way, you see a picture of the school to which I went in Krakow, where you have the picture of the school of Athens. So the kind of the idea, Greek, Roman, and then modern languages. In Islamic world, you have very often a kind of almost division of labor between Arabic as a language of law and religion, Persian as the language of lyrical poetry. You have the same in India with Sanskrit, Pali, and even later up to 20th century in Bengal, for instance, an educated person would have been speaking Persian to show he is cultured and English to show he is, so to say, can be a good businessman. So that's this kind of one narrative, but the other, here you see some more dramatic things. Doctors give pupils sick notes to duck French and German lessons. Among fears, the stress of learning a second language is harming their mental health. So the two narratives could not be more different. And as I mentioned, I think one of the difficulties, or let's say one of the issues here in this comparison, is that the negative narrative is very much built on this limited resources metaphor. So here is a letter which, in reaction to one of my papers, of course it's nice to have a second language, but I don't believe this science twaddle for 1 second. The human brain can only contain a finite amount of information, and as English speakers we are fortunate not to need a secondary language. That space is much better utilized for science, history, and our rich culture. That was one of the letters to Daily Mail reacting to my paper about the advantages of language learning for cognitive state and aging, so to say. And you have also Lee Kuan Yew, otherwise supporting very much languages, bilingualism in Singapore, but confining it to only 2 languages, so you should not have, for instance, different versions of Chinese, Cantonese, or Hokkien and Hakka and so on. We have only 2 GB of memory in our brain. So we see that this limited resources metaphor is very often using the metaphor of the language, but without providing any evidence. And I think the problem here is that this is very, very closely related with what I would call instrumental approach to language learning. So languages are there as instruments to do other things. I mean, one of the words which is most commonly used, at least in UK, I wonder whether it's also in your countries, is toolkit. So for everything you have now work packages and toolkits, and then the result will be a toolkit, a list, an app, and so on and so on. Everything is very, very instrumental. And in such a world, very often you could say English is enough. If we all speak English, I give now this talk in English, you hopefully understand me, why should we bother about other languages? And if unavoidable, I would say the two languages which might survive is Chinese because of it's important for business, and Spanish because it's so cool. Salsa, tango, all the kind of despacito, all the association, so to say, of Spanish. And this instrumental approach means that almost per definition, there will be a low status of small and minority languages and of immigrant languages. So you have very clearly a language hierarchy with English being at the top, then maybe, let's say, Chinese and Spanish being kind of okay, maybe then, you know, Spanish and German, and then it goes down and basically is not really relevant. I think in order really to make our point about the importance of languages, we need to change very much the narrative, the way how we conceptualize it. We have to get away, firstly, from the idea of languages as lists of words. I have here apples because that's a kind of, for me, good metaphor. The idea is in many languages we have words for apple, and it is assumed that it's more or less the same word. So basically, whether I say apfel in German, or pomme in French, or manzana in Spanish, or jabłko in Polish, it's more or less the same object. And very often, particularly monolingual people, have the idea that language is just that. And if that were the case, then indeed we would not need any languages. It would be just transferring one-to-one reality from one language to the other. But even at the level of simple words, it's not the same. So here I have two pictures of bread, a broad, so proper German bread, and let's say a toast bread, which I'm confronted with every day in the country I live in, namely UK, and I have not adjusted in over 20 years, and I don't think I ever will. So in a way, even the same word might have different associations. This becomes, as I show in the next slide, much more important when we are kind of looking at more complex ways of seeing reality. The second thing which we have to abandon is the idea of ease and speed, that basically learning should be easy, fast, and efficient. And the third is that the ideal that we are following is to speak like a native speaker. I think those three assumptions have caused a lot of damage to the cause of languages. We should see languages as worlds, different ways of being, different perspectives, different ways of being and seeing the world. And therefore, we need to move towards the vision of language as a mental exercise and a transferable skill which can show itself even in areas outside language, and I will be giving examples, as shared experience, even if you are not native speakers, and as discovery and adventure. So let me elaborate a little bit on that. One is the question, different perspective and same events. I have here some examples. So let's imagine, I'm sure it never happened to any of you, but I have to admit it did happen to me occasionally. I arrive at the train station and I'm too late and I miss the train. In English, I missed the train very clearly. It's my fault. It's my agency, which was not good. In German, you would also say, ich habe den Zug verpasst. But in Polish, I would say pociąg mi uciekł, which basically means the train ran away from me. And a similar structure can be said in Spanish, se me ha ido el tren. So you have the same event, but I would say a slightly different perspective. Let's look at something different, emotion. If we say in Polish, zmarła mu matka, it's not quite the same, or in Spanish, se le ha muerto la madre, as to say zmarła matka, the mother has died. This mu means that this had some impact on this person. So in a way, you include the emotional connection within the sentence, which is different from the English his mother died, or the famous, all the fans of Camus will recognize the first sentence of L'Étranger, Aujourd'hui, maman est morte. And let me give you just a third example, very, very banal. How are you? Now, very often when people want to impress me that they have learned some Polish, they say, jak się masz? Well, if you ask a Polish person like this, well, if you ask an English person, how are you? The answer is, oh, fine, thank you, how are you? If you ask a Polish person, jak się masz, you are likely to be stuck for the next 10 minutes hearing, well, you know, I didn't sleep so well because, you know, I think I've eaten something a little bit too much yesterday, and then I was thinking about my daughter who is not doing at school as well as I thought, and I had this argument with my mother-in-law, and so on. Because if you ask in Polish, jak się masz, it is correct, is how are you, but it usually means that you really are genuinely interested to know how this other person is. So if you want to be more neutral, you would just say, co słychać? So what is being heard? What are the news? And then you can either say about yourself, or you can start gossiping about other people, which is also very nice, or you can just say, oh, well, nothing new. So from this point of view, even very, very simple sentences are not really the same functionally. And I have this picture here, it will reappear later on, because very often we have this kind of tokenist multilingualism in which people believe if they write, you know, hello in different languages, they are multilingual. Now, if you look at this, if you look at the Arabic, you realize something very, very funny. The Arabic is complete rubbish. It is written from left to right rather than from right to left. So basically, the letters are being put in a way which would not make any sense in real Arabic. So, you have here an example that even something so fundamental does not really correspond to each other. So we really get a lot of interesting things if we delve into languages. But we don't get it for free. It is effort. And if I think about the best things in my life, I would say most of them included quite a lot of effort. So here on the left is basically getting up at midnight and by sunrise being on the edge of Kilimanjaro before we went to the top. Absolutely fascinating, but I wouldn't say it was easy or effortless. And in fact, you don't need to go as far as Kilimanjaro. Here below you have a picture of Bain Scrichal in Scottish Highlands, which can be quite difficult as well and effortful, but fascinating. On the right, you have a picture from Svalbard, from Spitsbergen, and a 25-26 hours journey by a small boat to the Polish Arctic station in the south of the island. Well, again, I would say absolutely fascinating, but not fast, easy, and effortless. And just to show this is not just about exotic journeys, below on the right you might recognize me being slightly younger. This is the moment my daughter was born, probably the most important day in my life in some way. I'm holding her in my hands. Well, I would say having children, for all of you who have children, is certainly an absolutely amazing experience, but it's a lifetime project and it's certainly not easy and effortless. So from this point of view, I think we should not sell languages as something being fast, easy and effortless, but as something being a adventure, a life adventure which has great value, but also requires efforts because things without effort usually don't have much value. Now, we should also be careful not to set our ideals too high. In Gaelic, there is a beautiful saying, "Siar Gaelic wriście na Gaelic sahiście." Broken Gaelic is still better than Gaelic in the coffin. So basically, if let's say I want to go hill walking and I think I should start with Mount Everest, it might be slightly overambitious. And even in Scotland, in the middle, we have the very famous, one of the Munros, inaccessible pinnacle in the Cuillins Sky. I haven't done it yet, and probably I never will. And the same, by the way, with children. I might be dreaming about my daughter singing Brunhilde at the Bayreuth Festival in Wagner's Götterdämmerung, but it might not really come true. So from this point of view, having realistic goals is quite important. Effort, yes. Realistic goals, yes. Now, but what is the alternative? This is for me how I perceive monolingualism. Monolingualism in action. Monolingualism is, in my view, the mental equivalent of sedentary life. Yes, it is convenient, it is easy, it doesn't need much extra time, but you are basically dependent on whatever the television offers you, and you are also, well, it's not necessary, it's certainly not anything that would be good for our minds or our imagination, and so on and so on. So let me just do a small experiment in which I show you a little bit this effort of multilingualism. And I have to warn you that within the next few minutes, I will slow down your brain processing. So if you don't want to see it, please look away, because there is a danger. You might be slightly slower, and you will see why. Now, if you think what this is, and you see this picture, if you are an English speaker, and we all know English, you would say a dog. In German, it would be Hund or Hund in Dutch. In Polish, it's called pies. So pies is dog. Then, of course, it's perro in Spanish, chien in French, or gosse in Catalan, and so on. I like this picture because, for an interesting reason, the word for dog is very different across European languages, whereas the word for cat is quite similar, basically from Portuguese down to Russian. Okay, so now you learned quite a bit about dogs in different languages, and now I will show you a picture with a word on the top and 3 pictures below, and I will ask you to tell me which picture the word corresponds to. Are you all ready? I hope so. Okay, so I would say some of you might be 150 milliseconds slower than others, because if you are an English monolingual, you would say, oh, of course, it's the pies. If you are Polish monolingual, you would say, oh, this is pies. If you are Spanish monolingual, you would say, oh, pies, the feet below. But if you know all 3 languages, then you know that, in fact, all 3 words or all 3 pictures can correspond to it. So from this point of view, you have a bigger network, and this can make you slightly slower, but it also makes your network in the brain much richer. Let me give you another example. I remember that many years ago, I was at a conference in Turku, the second biggest city in Finland, and the main square in the middle is called Kauppatori. And some people say, oh, well, I don't know how the square is called. It's such a kind of funny Finnish name. Now, Kauppatori sounds strange, indeed Finnish, but both words are known to a lot of Europeans from their own languages. Kauppa is the same as Köben in Copenhagen, Schöpen, kaufen in German, kupić in Polish, the word kupiec, or even cheap in cheap side in English. So from this point of view, we have into Finnish transposed a word which you find in a lot of Germanic, but even in some Slavonic languages. And tori, or torg, or targ, or tyrgu is something you find on the right in places from Scandinavia down to Romania. So that means that in a way, if I hear now Kauppatori and I can associate this, I can have an activation of all my map of Europe from Scandinavia and England down to Poland and Romania, basically based on these words. And that's how it works also in the brain. When I started working on language in 1980s, the most popular idea was the modular vision of the brain. So the idea was very much influenced by Fodor's modularity of mind, that everything is informationally encapsulated in modules, very deterministic, static with limited resources. It was not a perfect model because, for instance, it was very difficult to explain recovery in diseases, compensation theories, and so on. So my PhD was, in fact, how difficult it is to apply this model to the evolution of aphasia. But also, it was difficult to accommodate multilingualism. Do you have a separate module for every language, or do you have sub-modules? It's not, I mean, ideally, in a way, naturally, it's best to have one language and don't worry about it. Now, over the 20 or 30 years since then, our views changed very much from modules to networks. We have now very different technology. We have now internet, machine, pathology, neuroimaging. We have the rise of understanding of social cognition, which is now a big, big topic and was not 50 years ago. We have recontextualizing linguistics, basically. And here you see, for instance, two models of brain function by the same person, David Green, one from 1998, still kind of relatively modular, and one from 2013, together with his colleague Jubin Abutalebi, which basically is much more flexible. And in this combination, we have an increasing role of linguistic environment, sociolinguistic variables relevant for cognition, not only proficiency and age of acquisition, but also changing patterns of use, code switching, and so on and so on. I will come to it a little bit later or at the very end of this talk. Now, so from this point of view, probably one of the oldest kind of well-described advantages of knowledge of more languages is metalinguistic knowledge. The idea that if we know more than one language, we realize that different words are different mapping of the world, different ways of interpreting the world, regular correspondence between languages. John Locke, by the way, already noticed that basically anybody who knows a language beyond the kind of very, very beginner's phase realizes that only the simple words correspond one-to-one. Otherwise, every language has its special, so to say, inventory of classifying and understanding the world. And we can know also the arbitrariness of written language. Beautiful citation from Goethe in his, it was published in his posthum collection of Sprüche, of saying, wer fremde Sprachen nicht kennt, weiß nichts von seiner eigenen. Who doesn't know foreign language doesn't understand his own. And this was beautifully reformulated by Lev Semyonovich Vygotsky in 1934 in his book. Now I have to confirm that I was speaking some German. So you see, the computer is very, very clever. They know. Okay, so let's look whether it will recognize another language. Namely here, what I absolutely love is, his idea is not just that it's enriching, so to say, for child to learn a language. He says that the learning another language liberates the mind of the child from the yoke of concrete things. So, so he compares this to algebra, which frees from the concrete numbers, and says, tak toczne uswojenie inostrannego języka, so learning another language, другими, освобождает речевую мысль ребенка из плена конкретных языковых форм или явлений. So it liberates the thought from the concrete, from the yoke of concrete linguistic forms and appearances. I think a very, very beautiful metaphor. And you could say, okay, this was very speculative at that stage, but we have now quite a lot of empirical evidence for that. So, whereas in early 20th century, particularly in the West, Vygotsky was very much ahead of his time, bilingualism was considered as a burden, at least since absolutely so revolutionary work by Peel and Lambert in Montreal in the early 60s, we know that bilingualism has positive effects in children, metalinguistic skills, social cognition, executive functions, and in early 21st century, it was found that it has also positive effects on older participants. In dementia, it causes cognitive reserve, which means that people develop dementia years later. This is a study where I was fortunate to work with my Indian colleague Suvarna Alladi, whom I met at Cambridge, and she went then back to Hyderabad, which has been a very, very multilingual place. Now, the studies by Białystok and I was showing, and Maurice Friedman and Fergus Craig from Toronto were criticized because many of their bilinguals had migrant background, either first or second generation. So the idea was, well, maybe it was something not about language, it was something about healthy migrant effect, migration being a selection event, and so on and so on. But Hyderabad has been very multilingual for centuries and centuries. So here we have bilingualism, which is common, old, not associated with migration, with excellent clinical services and multilingual tests and stuff. And we found very similar 4 years delay, like in the Toronto study, and in fact, in illiterate people, because very often say, oh, well, maybe the multilinguals went to better schools. People who are illiterate, who cannot read and write, they found an even stronger effect of bilingualism. Here you have 6 years rather than 4 years delay. And similar things found in mild cognitive impairment. So in fact, you have studies in different continents, different countries, and so on, pointing to the same phenomenon. But now, if bilingualism can delay onset of something negative, like dementia, it should also be able to accelerate something positive, like recovery from stroke. And that was another study I was fortunate to be able to do with Suvarna in Hyderabad, where we look at stroke patients, again over 600, so quite a large group. And here our logic was following. If the difference is about bilinguals being healthier, maybe they have better diet or better access to health services and so on, you should expect later age of stroke. If it's about lifestyle, then so to say, it would be they should deliver stroke later. If it's cognitive reserve, how they cope with the damage, then you would have the same age but different outcome. And that's exactly what we found. There was no difference in age of stroke, but there was clear difference in outcome. Monolinguals, less than 20% had restored cognition after stroke, over 40% of bilinguals had it. Aphasia, so language disorder, was seen in both groups, but it was global, so much more profound in about 3 times more people than in monolinguals than bilinguals. So here we have, I think, quite strong results. But the question is, well, maybe it's the other way around. Maybe people who are more clever are likely to learn languages, because those people not necessarily, they learn the languages not necessarily at home, but, working from neighbors and so on and so on. So maybe there is a causality the other way around. And here, what helped us a lot was a so-called Lothian birth cohort. So these are people who were all born in 1936 and were tested for their intelligence, for the school purpose, so to say, aptitude when they were 11 in June 1947, age 11. They are now, well, they were first retested in the 70s, then in the 80s, now they are in the 90s. And what we found is people who learned another language after age 11 perform better than you would predict from their childhood intelligence. Of course, if you were on the kind of highest, 5 top percentages of 5 percentile, then you are more likely to be also on a high percentile later on. And if you're on the lower one, then you are more likely to be on the lower one also 70 years later. It's not for all like this, because you can also go up or down, but if you have about 1,000 people, then you can have a similar effect. Now, interestingly, people got better, and that was also people who were very, very low on the scale. So it's not that language learning is only something for the particularly clever. Everybody could basically benefit from it. And interested in that, we did several studies looking at language learning in young people, in older people. We were looking in our students, first and year 4 students of language, who were equal in their attention switching in the first year to students of other humanities, but outperformed them 4 years later once they spent 1 year abroad and learned another language quite fluently. And we did something similar in intensive Gaelic course, Salmor Ostag on the Isle of Skye, where we had 1 week of intensive learning, and interestingly, 18 to 85, so really all age groups. And we found that people improved after 1 week, and those who persisted in their practice more than 5 hours a week retained this improvement. So you get an improvement relatively fast, but in order to preserve it, you have to practice, not surprisingly. And we did some other studies looking at the dynamics of language use across the life. So here, for instance, we are looking at the dynamic use of Gaelic. So people who were living in the Western Isles, usually they would have been bilingual in their young years because that was a bilingual area where you, at home, in the community, in the church, people would be speaking Gaelic, but at school, the official school language was only English. During their life, working life, they had usually to speak English because you just need one non-Gaelic speaker and then all the community speaks only English. And after retirement, they move back to speak more and more Gaelic. So from this point of view, language is dynamic across our whole life. And one of the areas I'm studying now, so hopefully in a year or 2 or 3, I can give some more examples, is about the kind of natural course of language in multilingual people, so to say, in later life. Obviously, longitudinal studies like this need time. And just to show that this can lead to practical interventions, a social enterprise founded in Glasgow by Robbie Norvar, whom I've seen today, by the way, in an event about Scots, is offering language classes to healthy elderly and to patients with dementia. And we found that it counteracts loneliness and low self-esteem. People feel much better when they feel they can still do something. Now, let me come to the kind of last few slides. So that is something which, in a way, I would say was clear to me already when I was giving this last talk 2001, and practically since probably doing this model with Dina Mehmetbegovic 2017 of Health Linguistic Diet. But one thing which became even clearer to me over the last few years is, and that is something to do with courses that I was organizing about decolonization, is that the dominance of English, particularly in the academic world, is even more than I would have thought. So I don't know in your places, but in UK and particularly in Scotland, decolonization is a big topic. We are now much more aware about the role that Scotland played in the slave trade, in the exploitation of the slaves, how much of the money from which our beautiful architecture, including universities, was built, came basically from slave trade and slave exploitation. So this is a big topic. But there is a certain linguistic paradox in this work. While there is a rising interest in the topic becomes more and more English only. So here on the right, you can see a selection of books that I was reading preparing my course. I read probably about 24 books in 5 languages. So apart from English, French, Portuguese, Spanish, and German. And you do get a very, very different view of the world. And interestingly, if you see books written, let's say, like around 1940s or 50s, like for instance the very, very famous, important book by Eric Williams about the slavery and capitalism, you find citations in Spanish, in French, and so on and so on. So clearly, someone who was reading different languages. If you look the latest books on decolonization, even something like, Decolonizing Minds, about decolonization of psychology, you find only citations in English. So ironically, we are decolonizing and recolonizing at the same time. We are decolonizing the topics, but we are recolonizing linguistically. And you find this because English became basically a default language. Now, the picture I have here this is from today morning when I was at this event about Scots, and there was coffee on the left, and then there were these 2, so to say, closed, jars, and in one was written oat. Now, immediately everybody realized if this is oat, it's probably oat milk, so the other will be proper milk. It was not even written milk on it because that would be the default. And that is a little bit how English is now in science. You don't even say, if you look, for instance, at talks about languages, very often, if you have a talk about Turkish or about Dutch or about Spanish, it will be said, acquisition of this in Spanish or in Turkish. If this is about English, it will be said acquisition of vocabulary in children. So basically, language means English language without anything being said. So you have multilingualism as a lip service, a little bit like this saying hello, bonjour, ni hao, and so on in different languages, so that, you know, we've done our slides, so now we can do everything in English. And indeed, I know colleagues of mine who are not English native speakers, who are proud not to be able to write a scientific paper or give a talk in their own language because everything they do is only in English. That is the situation that we have at the moment. Now, you could argue, well, but translation is a solution to everything. Well, firstly is what gets translated. You will find, for instance, as I can tell you from experience, very different picture of colonization if you read things in English or, for instance, in French. Most English sources don't even mention that France abolished, revolutionary France abolished slavery 40 years before England. It's almost non-existent. Well, I have to admit that Napoleon has reintroduced it, but that was the first time that it was officially abolished. So you have biased filtering, so it's not that everything gets translated, only things that are very nice for English-speaking authors. I was just a few weeks ago in Sardinia, and interestingly, I found a kind of nice selection of poems, a bilingual edition, Sardinian and Italian. And it has been translated into many languages, but English was not one of them. It was translated into Galician and Catalan, Polish, Hungarian, Russian, French, but not into English. So you cannot assume that everything valuable is translated into English, only what English-speaking readers like. And even if it is translated, it's very often difficult to translate complex words, as we learned, because language is a word interpretation. So, what I would say probably changed in my understanding over the last 4 years since the last talk is that I understand now much more the need for understand language in its environment. We have three things here. So individual choice is still important. Well, we cannot choose what our parents speak with us. We can maybe influence the parents to use their language, but I would say we can still learn languages even until later life. So my slogan here is never too late. So individual choice is important. But, and this is basic old pictures from Bali, because that was where I met, with John in February, now with January, February with Dina Mehmetbegovic, and we are kind of revising our model of healthy linguistic diet. It requires presence of languages, what we call linguistic landscape. So here, for instance, you could see that Balinese starts being more and more present on Bali, which I think is important because it shows, yes, there is another language here. It needs resources like books, internet, and so on, and it needs communities where you can practice it. So this is, so to say, the second part of a triangle. So here I have the metaphor of those three mountains, or triangles. But in order for us to make this choice and to use it, we need also attitudes and beliefs. So we need perceived value of languages. If we don't believe that languages are important, then we will not do it. We need encouragement. So let me put it in this way, for instance. Let's say if I want to read books in other languages, then it's important that, for instance, my library, or I can find them on internet. But the fact that they are there, even if I know that the language, will not help me if I don't feel that is valuable. So we need both. We need the individual choice, or all three, presence of languages and attitudes and beliefs. And this is my last slide now. This is the model, the extended model of health linguistic diet. So you see here the idea of health linguistic diet in the middle, and you see three triangles. One is health and well-being. Psychological, physical, and social. So this is something, so to say, where we can try to cultivate languages, practice them, and so on, because it benefits us in many respects. But in order really to do it, we need these languages to be present in the environment around us. So that's why on the left side, we have now environment and sustainability, things like rootedness, intercultural competence, linguistic habitats, as we call it. We need to have linguistic landscape. We need to have the languages present in our environment, virtual as well as real. And we need, and that's the last on the right side, triangle, social justice and inclusion, we need to attach value to them in terms of belonging, in terms of what we call epistemic habitats. So how we construct knowledge. Do we construct knowledge just in English and then try to translate in other languages? Or can we construct it by bringing together perspectives from other languages? And what we need, and particularly I assume that a lot of my audience today are academics, we need academic plurilingualism. The idea that basically everything valuable is only in English and everything which is not in English is not valuable is dangerous for our understanding of the world, because it is a dramatic shrinking of our epistemic perspective to only one language out of 7,000. So in a way, it is an incredible impoverishment in vocabulary, way of thinking, seeing the world, and so on and so on. And I think this is something where at least we can hopefully do something. So if you are interested in this new model, I have here the link. So we publish it on the International Day of Multilingualism, 27th of March, and we have it now in press in European Journal of Language Policy and under review in Language and Society, Language Society and Policy. Okay, so thank you very much indeed, and I would be delighted to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Thomas, for this wonderful and inspiring talk. I personally am very happy to have attended it, and I think for our audience it's not different. Ian, you monitored the chat a little bit. Is there any important question you might want to cite from the chat first?
Yes, we've got a very interesting one here from Marco. Thomas, thank you very much. You've had an awful lot of positive feedback here, both with thumbs up and also thanks in the chat. You probably haven't seen it all, but people are very grateful for your talk. One question from Marco says, based on your experience and studies, does it make a difference to the protection that you get against neurological conditions as to what age you learn a second or third language?
Well, thank you very much. This is, in fact, one of my favorite questions, and I would say something or answer in a way which you will find very surprising. I would say the later the better. Now, we always think of languages, the earlier the better. But, I mean, let me give you a comparison. Imagine two people, one of whom is a very, very sporty boy and plays a lot of tennis and maybe, even wins Wimbledon with 20, and then with 25 stops playing and spend the next 50 years just sitting on the sofa drinking beer and watching TV. And then imagine another person who is not very, very sporty as a child, but then, with, let's say, 30 or 40, decides that he needs some movement and plays tennis twice a week. Which of these two people do you think will be fitter with 70 or 75? So in a way, if our goal, our target is to sound like a native speaker, no question, the earlier the better. But if our goal is to, so to say, to have the positive effects, then I would say the whole life matters, and you can start, learning languages quite late. I mean, one of the most impressive people I met was, Mary Hobson, unfortunately died a few years ago, but I met her just before her 90th birthday. She was 56 when she started learning Russian with English speaker, monolingual English speaker. With 75, she did her PhD on Griboyedov, a Russian poet of 19th century. With 90, she published a new translation of Evgeny Onegin, one of the chief works of Russian poetry. So yes, you can learn quite well. And I think in terms of, so to say, our long-term protection, it does not only matter what we do the first years, it matters what we do all our life.
Okay.
Yeah, is there anybody who'd like to ask a question live using their audio? If you would, then switch on your audio and ask the question in whatever language you prefer.
Hi.
Where are we? Yep.
Hi, this is Harsha.
Harsha, the floor's yours.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, that's a wonderful opportunity, Thomas. I really appreciate that, how well you execute all the points, and Really appreciate as a educator. But still, sometimes I realize that in many foreign countries, still the accents matters. So whenever we're using the language other than our mother tongue, the people try to realize you that you have accents, you have a particular accent. So why this is always a barrier in language learning, that accents still are not get overcome in foreign countries, or is it any flaws of the education system that we need to improve?
Well, thank you very much for
Thank
the
you.
question. I think it's so to say a sociolinguistic question. By the way, not only between languages, but within language. So let's say I'm here now in Edinburgh, and we have a lot of students who come from, as we say in Scotland, south of the border, and you can hear immediately that they grew up probably in London or in Midlands and so on, and not in Scotland, and vice versa. When Scottish students go to London, they will still sound Scottish. So you have these accents also within the language. And well, I think for me, the kind of the best metaphor I know is that the accents are a little bit like, they get more or less crystallized around the time of our adolescence, where a lot of civilizations have their initiation rites. So in a way, accents tells you where you were socialized, where you learned, so to say, your first things. It has relatively little to do with other aspects of language, such as grammar, vocabulary, and so on. And one of the examples which I find always very, very, let's say, reassuring is my colleague from school. I showed you a picture of my school in Krakow, and some years earlier, one of our pupils was a certain Joseph Konrad, or Józef Konrad Korzeniowski. Now, he became one of the most prominent writers in English. I mean, it's part of the curriculum of English literature. But I know Bertrand Russell, who was his great admirer, once went to visit him, and then he was saying, when he first met him, he could not believe that someone who was writing such a beautiful literary English was speaking with such a dense Polish accent. So from this point of view, I think this is for me a very, very good example that you can reach quite a sophisticated level of knowledge of language without necessarily sounding like a native speaker. So for me, this is a very, very different, it's the question of sociolinguistic, is the question of, so to say, in-group, out-group. And as I say, it's something which is very much part within languages as much as between languages. So thank you very much for this question.
Thanks a lot.
Vielleicht darf ich selbst eine Frage so perhaps I myself might answer a question in German. So now the question in German. Wir haben ja zurzeit als Sprachlehrer beispielsweise das Problem, dass mit dem Advent, also mit dem Aufkommen der künstlichen Intelligenz, es immer schwieriger wird, Studenten, Schüler, überhaupt Menschen im Allgemeinen dazu zu motivieren, Sprachen zu lernen. Thomas, haben Sie eine Idee, ein schlagendes Argument sozusagen dafür, aus Ihrer Sicht, dafür, dass das Sprachenlernen doch noch wertvoll ist? Natürlich kann man sagen, damit das Gehirn fit bleibt, aber irgendetwas, was die Menschen wirklich dazu bringt, trotz ChatGPT und seinen Freunden weiterhin Fremdsprachen zu lernen.
Ja, also ich würde sagen, also dieses Slide, das ich hatte, also Diapositiv mit meinen Erfahrungen. Natürlich kann man auch, also anstatt nach Spitzbergen zu fahren, könnte ich mir die Bilder anschauen oder irgendwo Virtual Reality mir vorstellen, dass ich irgendwie auf dem Boot dort bin. Vielleicht kann man sogar irgendwie im Sitz hin und her schwanken. Und natürlich könnte ich auch irgendwie auf einen Gipfel mit einem Helikopter fliegen. Aber ich werde nicht das gleiche Erlebnis haben. Das heißt, für mich ist der Unterschied, und deswegen das Erlebnis ist ganz, ganz dicht sozusagen an die positive Wirkung im Gehirn verbunden. Es ist ein Unterschied, ob wir das selber durchmachen oder ob wir das sozusagen draußen haben. Wenn jemand zufrieden ist, nur sich Bilder anzuschauen, dann braucht er nicht zu reisen. Aber ich habe Reisen immer noch lieber. Ich muss sagen, also ich mag auch zum Beispiel, ich gehe lieber in ein Restaurant und versuche zum Beispiel die Vielfalt der chinesischen Küche zu probieren, als mir das alles nur auf Bildern anzuschauen. Das heißt also von daher, wenn wir das unmittelbare Erlebnis haben wollen, dann brauchen wir das in der Sprache. Deswegen denke ich, müssen wir uns verabschieden von dieser instrumentalen Vorgehensweise, dass man die Sprachen benutzt, um jetzt da braucht man eigentlich die Sprachen nicht. Da kann man häufig irgendwie mit dem Zeichen was machen. Aber wenn es um mein eigenes Erlebnis geht, dann macht es einen Unterschied.
Thank you very much. So it would be ChatGPT as a kind of secondary experience, a kind of second life. But if we want to live primarily and really live, then we have to learn languages on our own. Thank you very much for this great answer. Are there any further questions, be it in English, German, French, or Spanish, or Polish, which only Thomas Bach might understand?
I'm a neurologist. I have a question of Thomas.
Yes, please.
So you talk about language, but we don't really know the mechanisms by which language is constructed from words and from grammar. I have an observation which I wondered what Thomas would think about it. I'm 10 years retired and I lose words. So I can be having a conversation and I'll lose a word here and it'll come back in 5 seconds or perhaps tomorrow morning when I wake up. But another way I have of continuing a conversation, which is language, I think we're agreed, is to approach it from one of my other 2 languages. So I know what I'm thinking about. I can't find the word in English, so I'll go through Polish or I'll go through French. And that often works. There are other techniques like that, going through the alphabet is often a good one if you're a monolingual and so on. So my question is about how we construct languages and whether within your menu, whether you need to think about how different languages are constructed, because it seems to me that there isn't a general way of constructing languages, and that is an old idea which I think is now dead, or at least I hope it is.
Yeah, well, thanks a lot. Well, I think that's a wonderful example. So obviously, to find the right word is something that we all realize is getting more difficult with age, and that affects monolinguals as well. So it's not that it's a kind of problem of bilinguals. I mean, monolinguals find it difficult to find the right word very often as well. We are just in the lucky position that we might have, so to say, the second or third choice. So in a way, that is a good example of an advantage, because sometimes where we don't find the first vocabulary, we find the second or third. And in fact, I just went today through this. I was thinking about to be lazy, which I think is, preguiçoso in Portuguese, and I think poseur, because I found it in French, and I thought, what is in Spanish? It's perezoso. So in a way, it happens very often, and then some words will be directly connected, absolutely. So as I say, apple is a good example. Some words will have different associations in different languages, and that is something I'm very, very interested as well. So for instance, we did a study about Maltese and English bilinguals, and basically when you have the word bread in English, the first association people will have is butter. But when you say khobz, in Maltese, which is like in Arabic, the bread, then the first association will be zait, which is olive oil, because you would have it with olive oil. So in a way, I think if we look at it from the kind of network point of view, we have sometimes direct connections, we have sometimes different structures, and yet we don't understand everything, so to say, fully. But I think having more languages means just that we have another, so to say, cushion, which makes this forgetting slightly less problematic, because we might be able to activate it through some other things. One moment. And by the way, another nice example I had, that was Arabic and English bilinguals. The word pork was, the association English was breakfast, and the association Arabic was haram, which means forbidden. not surprisingly.
Thank you very much. We are being urged a little bit by the ICC administration.
To put the slide, yes.
Ian, is there anything that you would like to still ask from the chat? Anything interesting you found? I mean, there were a lot of
there were quite a few other
remarks,
questions, but I don't think we're going to have time to.
Well, actually, I'm afraid so as well. I just asked you in order to push the boundaries a little bit. We've been pushing a lot of language boundaries in your talk. Thomas, thank you very much for this wonderful talk. Thank you to the audience for asking questions, for being very active in the chat as well. These special days, which I mentioned in the introduction, remind us that languages are bridges. Bridges to people, to cultures. That's what we have just lived and experienced online. And also to healthier, more open minds and brains. So on behalf of the ICC and also the Language Council of Saarland, I wish you all, not only to our speaker, but I wish you all many joyful encounters with languages in the days, years, and decades ahead. Thank you very much, Thomas. A heartfelt thanks goes to you. And now there's a slight break because I would like to continue talking quickly about a symposium. We might soon see the slide on this as well. A GEM symposium, which I'm organizing for the Language Council of Saarland. This symposium is about the teaching and learning of German from a global perspective. And it will take place on the 29th of October in Saarbrücken, Germany. So it's an on-site event, but it will also be streamed. So the symposium is titled, and that's a translation into English, Teaching and Learning German Internationally, Dynamic Perspectives and Current Developments, which will explore the diversity of German language education worldwide. Participants will have the opportunity to discuss various educational systems, cultural contexts, political frameworks, and institutional approaches that shape the teaching and learning of German. I'm delighted that our keynote speaker will be Professor Per Urlaub from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology in Boston. He will be joined by other distinguished professors from Europe, America, Africa, and Asia. You are cordially invited to participate in this dialogue about the future of German language education. And the symposium will be conducted in German exclusively.
We've had quite a lot of questions in the chat today about membership benefit, the fact that it is the policy at the ICC that our webinars are open to everybody and are free of charge. Our policy is that certificates go to ICC members. And in the same way, another benefit of being an ICC member is that we put the recordings of the video. Normally, we put them up first for our members and then later for everybody. I would encourage you, because ICC is one of the few language organizations which is genuinely multilingual. It's not only English, as we've seen. And we're very keen to encourage new people to join. And in fact, the health of the organization is dependent on our members. So have a look at our website, and if you feel you would like to, then please join us as a member. We'd be very keen to have you. And we also have, going back to the slide we had before, we have a conference every year, and we're very keen to see as many people there as possible. This year we were on Cyprus for a very successful conference. And next year, you can see here, we will be in Zurich from the 8th to the 10th of May. And you can also see there the title of our conference, Multilingualism. We're looking at migrant integration in adult education, adult language education, the practices, challenges and opportunities there. There's a QR code if you want to use that to get more information, and we'll be publicizing it and providing more and more information about the conference over the coming months with a call for papers and everything. But you might want to note the dates for now. Next May 8th to the 10th of May in Zurich, and we're very much looking forward to that, and hopefully see as many of you there, and hopefully as many of you as possible will be members by then. We'd love to have you. And I think it just remains to say thank you very much to Thomas today. That was absolutely fascinating. Brought in a very large number of people, not only brought them in, but kept them in till the end, which is great. And as it says here, the recording will soon be accessible on our YouTube channel and also the Language Council of Saarland. So I think that all that remains is to say thank you once again to Thomas for his time and such fascinating insights. Lots of questions that we didn't get around to in the chat. Maybe we can save the chat and pass it on to you, Thomas.
Oh, that would be great, please.
Yeah. And thank you very much for everybody who attended, for your comments in the chat, your feedback. And sorry if we didn't get around to asking your question, but as you can see, Thomas is a very accessible person and looks forward to your comments, I'm sure. So thank you very much, everybody. We'll wind up now and wish you all a happy rest of day, whatever time it is where you are.